Hello, today I thought I'd have a play around with my gel plates and do some printing on them. A few people have asked if I'd do a video on this, but I'm not particularly experienced with them, so I'll have a play session, and while I'm refreshing myself on the basics, hopefully it'll be helpful for some other people too. So this is the gel plate. I keep my gel plates stuck to this back plastic sheeting. It just makes it easier to handle them. It's a great surface for applying paint to, and I think you can play around with other mediums. I've seen people using oil pastels on them as well, and also acrylic markers. I've also used mine for stamping before, and I'll link to a video in the description box down below where I did some of that. A lot of people seem to recommend using student grade acrylic paints, and I tend to use these Amsterdam acrylics and sometimes the Galleria. But I bought a big set of these, and then when I've started to run out of these colours, I've replaced them with the larger size ones. So as well as a gel plate and some acrylic paint, you need a roller. And this is just an old cronky one which I just keep for my gel plate. So today I'm not going to try and create a finished piece of work. I'm just going to make lots of pieces which have got good texture and interesting marks in them, which I might use to make little mini cards with, or perhaps using some collaging. The basic concept then is that we coat the gel plate with paint, and it's best to use a minimal amount of paint. I keep a pile of scrap paper to the side just to clean my roller off on. So what you see from underneath is what you will see when it's printed. So at the moment, obviously, it's just going to be all plain pink. So I'm going to find an interesting way now to remove some of this paint so that I can let other layers of paint come through. So I've got a box here of homemade stamps and also masks. And the stamps work by just picking up some of the paint. So that's picked up a nice bit there. What else shall we do? Oh, might as well just use that. It missed a little bit there. Okay, so now if we look at it from underneath, that's what we'd have showing when we printed it. So now, and this is the hardest part for me with gel printing, is I've got to wait for this layer of paint to dry. So while that's just drying, I'll show you some of the stencils that I've got. This is the one that I got most recently. I showed it in my last video where I had got some new art materials. I think that's just about dry. So what I'm going to do this time, I'm going to put the stencil down. I'm going to put some red over it. I just want to pick it up on the roller a little bit first. My pink wasn't totally dry because it's picked a little bit of it up, but never mind. So just to show you, so that's what we're looking at now when it prints out. But because we've still got white areas or clear areas showing, we can add more paint and build up even more layers at the back. But I need to let that dry first again. I think some of the joy of gel plate printing is that you don't get a completely predictable finish, and it introduces a really nice element of chance to it. So for someone like me who tends to want to be in control a lot with their art, this is quite a good process and forces me to loosen up a bit. While that's drying, I'll start on another one. So I've got this very grubby little one, and I don't mind having extra stuff on it because it'll just add to the interest at the end. I think what I'll do, I'll use my new stencil and put that down first. If you want to keep your stamps and stencils and things nice and clean, it's probably a good idea to have a washing up bowl of soapy water on hand that you can just kind of chuck them in before the acrylic dries on them. But I'm not that fussed. You can see this has got quite a few layers of paint on and doesn't affect it too much. Right, so put that one aside now. Let's think. So I'll just put some background colour on this one now. Oops, might be a bit much. So some of my red spots were coming off there. I don't know if that's because I did the red paint too thin, or maybe I did too thin a coat of the yellow and it was sticky and pulled it up. So I've just got some normal cheap copier paper here. Fold it in half just to keep the size down. So I'm going to push that down firmly there, and then I'll set that aside and let it dry really, really thoroughly, because it needs to be totally dried so that you can pull off all the different layers onto the paper when I peel off the gel plate. So we can see roughly the design that we're going to get. The pattern's going to show up quite well, but it's not totally interesting. Let's see what else. So these stamps that I made, I used self-adhesive foam. So I've got a layer of the foam as the stamp, then I've got another layer of foam as the base for it, and then I've put it onto mount board, thick cardboard. So I'm just going to use it to lift some of the light blue. It's not taking a huge amount off. If If I let it dry though, it might pull both layers up, so I'm not going to do too much with that. I made quite a few seaweed and underwater type stamps at one point. Well, that's given us a little bit of clear area where another colour can show through. So I'll let that dry and we'll put another layer of paint on it. I'm not sure if I've left this one for long enough yet. We'll just test it. Okay, that's lifting up okay. So the pink layer that we put on first is foremost, and that kind of covers up a little bit the red dots that were the second layer. And then the blue and yellow with the background, which we put on last. So it's kind of just getting your head around the right order to do things in. Next I have a go at drawing on the gel plate with Posca pens. The ink beads up a little bit, but it's not too bad. I then tried drawing with a couple of different brands of oil pastels. They work but are quite faint. I'll let that dry for a minute. Let's come back to this one. Whoops, I've got black. Oh, it's the black Posca coming off. Never mind, that adds a greater element of abstractness to it. While those are drying, I'll just show you some of the other stamps and stencils that I've made. It's nice to use other things that you find as well, like bubble wrap. I made these for kind of like a hilltop picture. So these are the coming home trees, which you see when you're driving home to Cornwall, and some lines in the field below it. More sea things. That's a surfboard. I made a load of sunsetty surf cards for my craft market one time. Fish. I can't remember what I did the numbers for. Let's see if this one's dried at all. Yeah. So this was a pretty grubby gel plate, so there's some bits of gold foil and stuff in it as well, which looks quite nice. Have a play around with that. So you get an idea of how the layers work anyway, and it's just learning to work in reverse. Next I mask off some areas on my small jelly plate. and paint the remaining background. When I remove the masks, they leave behind a little bit of blue paint. Then I set this aside to dry and put a layer of paint over the now dry Posca pens. I use some gold coloured fluid acrylic from Golden and then remove a couple of stripes of it with a stamp. I then experiment with crumpling up some silver leaf and sprinkling it into the small jelly plate. And then I splodge on some areas of fluorescent paint with my fingers. Then I add a final layer of paint to this gel plate, and while it's still wet, I put paper on it. While those are drying, I'm going to work on a section of this big jelly plate. And I'm going to have a go at printing from a magazine. So what happens with a magazine image, or you can use a print made with toner ink, is that the areas where there's more toner will resist the paint more strongly and force the paint to stick to the gel plate. And areas of the magazine where there's less toner will allow the paint to stick to the magazine itself. So you're left with an image of the print. So I've got a magazine here. And now I haven't done this before, so it might be that I'm using too much paint. I think you've got to be careful with the amount of paint you use here. I'm curious just to see how newsprint works. So I'll put that there. And I'm not sure either how long you leave it, so we'll leave that one for a bit longer and I'll do some other images. So I've got that picture there, pop that there. Let's see what's... Oh, okay. So that's starting to work, but there's still some of the paint not absorbed. So it might be that I just did the paint a little bit thick. I'll leave that a bit longer. What shall we have across the top? That's got some bold shapes in it there, so let's pop that there. Okay, now I've let it dry too long and there's hardly any print left. So let's take this one off now. Now that's worked a bit better. Let's see what this one's doing. Well, semi kind of successful. So in future, I know that I need to use a thin, really even layer of paint and not leave the magazine down for too long. So I'll let that dry and we'll layer up some more on there. This is dried now, so I'll put some more colour on that. Let's see if this one's dried. Yeah. Oops. So I'm not sure how much I like the Posca marks, but it's definitely a way of adding different textures and mark making. And it's more faint, but you can see that the oil pastel has come off as well. So that worked for a more soft effect. I then play around with adding paint in different ways to the back of the magazine print. Well, there's some interesting things going on in there, including one of my fingerprints. I then just carry on experimenting in different ways. Here I got some rosemary out of the garden and I'm just squashing it down with a piece of paper over the top. And then when I lift it up, there's some of the marks of the leaves left behind. I add another layer of paint to the back of the magazine prints and remove paint in different ways from some of the areas. I then mask off some areas of the small jelly plate before putting paint on, including using some string. While I'm waiting for everything to dry, I'll just mention this gel matte medium. You can use it from any brand and it acts like clear acrylic paint. So once you've got a print on your gel plate that you like, if you don't want to add any more colour, you can use the gel medium and it'll work in exactly the same way, but it will dry clear. I'll speed through the rest of what I did now. I just had a good play time and tried out all sorts of things and generally made a big mess. So that was a pretty messy exploration session, I'd call it. I still haven't got the hang of gel printing at all in the way I'd like to, but I think I just need to have more of these play sessions where I learn what works and what doesn't. I've cropped all of the prints down now, and I think there's some quite nice interesting bits mixed in among the mess. I really liked the metallic leaf experiment. And I lifted this one too quickly. The paint was still wet and so I lost quite a bit of the detail from the middle of the rosemary leaves. But that was quite a fun experiment. I kind of got to grips with the very basics of layering with this first one. And then my magazine printing wasn't totally successful, but you can kind of see the potential in it. Like I said, I need to play around quite a bit more with the time that the print's left on and the thickness of the paint. This was the Posca one, which had some interesting kind of crackle texture going on there. And this one was done more with stamping, and I just left that vase shape masked out and then kind of stamped and printed more stuff on top of it. That was another one done using the rosemary leaf. So there's some interesting stuff here that could be used for collage. And in one of my previous videos I showed these aperture cards that I've been using. So there might even be some potential candidates to make cards out of. And quite pretty snippets. You get the idea anyway. Zooming in sometimes improves things. Well, thanks ever so much for joining me. I hope you perhaps learnt something from that, even if it's what not to do. Bye!